Welcome to Beyond the Fundamentals. We're in Full Stature Initiative number 22, and we're in Acts chapter 7. We're looking at the message of Stephen in Acts chapter 7. Thanks to everybody who supports the channel. We operate strictly from what viewers like you can provide. We produce these videos advertisement free, and we'd like to keep them that way. We also want to grow this channel into a 100% viewer-supported full-time ministry. If you would like to contribute, please see the details in the description below this video. We are here because of you, so thank you for that on behalf of everybody who watches these and gets a blessing out of them. So we're in Acts chapter 7. And if you go to Acts chapter 7, Stephen talks for a long time. Okay? Here's Acts chapter 7, and he goes on. There's more than 50 verses. And it's kind of difficult. It's not difficult, really. It's difficult to decide how to approach a passage like this. Do you chop it up, or do you try to cover all at one time? But the thing that I'm leaning toward is the focus, the impetus, what's most important of what's happening right now in Acts chapter 7 has to be the focus, and that has to be kept on the forefront. Now, everything that he goes through, everything Stephen goes through throughout the chapter, he's going through all the Old Testament history, starting with Abraham up to the current day. It's like a Cliff's Notes version of it, if you will. And therefore, we could get bogged down. And not that that's bad, but we could get bogged down and we could study all the intricate details and kind of forget the flow of what's happening in this narrative. So what I want to try to do is deal with what is said here, but also work hard to keep it in the flow of this narrative in the book of Acts. As I want to kind of keep a zoomed out feel to the entire book of Acts. Imagine all 28 chapters of the book of Acts and try to think about what's going on in each chapter. And then we can kind of see some major shifts take place right after this one, okay? So this is very, very important. In the history of Israel, they've been looking forward to the Messiah, to the arrival of the Messiah ever since Deuteronomy 18. Well, really, ever since Genesis 3. And then the prophecies about the Messiah get more and more specific, and then probably the first and most specific one would be Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 15 through 18, right around there where Moses foretells of, we get told that it's Jesus, foretells of Jesus. So, and when someone majorly important shows up, like when Abraham showed up, it really changed things. It changed the course. When Abraham started obeying God, he didn't stay with his kindred and with his family. He got out. And when Moses obeyed God, it really changed their situation there. And Jesus is this character who, when he shows up, that is a future anticipated, expected change in the course of events. Okay, it's supposed to stop being same old, same old. When this guy shows up, there's going to be a lot of things he's going to say to us, which is going to change the game. It's going to be a game changer. And he tells them that in Deuteronomy 18. When this prophet shows up, whatever he says, that shall ye do. In other words, he's going to say some things. He's going to have some things to say that Moses hasn't covered. And you need to follow him and obey him. So this is a major issue. And Stephen, who's doing the speaking here, realizes that this is a major issue. And if you were, like I'm in the United States, and when major things happen in the United States, like if there's an election that's really important or something like that, or a war, people will start to talk about what you might call our historic narrative. They refer back to our shared mythology. And I'm not using the word mythology as if it's false, but mythology as if it's legendary, okay? Our shared mythology. And you hear people refer back to our founders like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and Madison and Adams. And you hear people make a reference to momentous figures who played a big role in turning points like Abraham Lincoln. And you would go back in time. Whenever something major is happening in the United States, you would go back and you would appeal to everything that you might interpret as good and right, or everything that's bad, or things that are good. And you appeal to that, and that should give you direction and help with your discernment for what you should do now. Hey, we're about to have this election. Let's look at what our founders said about this kind of thing. We're about to possibly go to war. Let's look at what these people in the past did about this thing. You look back at your shared history, your shared mythology, okay? And then sometimes you take your shared narrative and it becomes mythologized. And like George Washington and the cherry tree, it's, that's understood to be an apocryphal story now. Things like that. Sometimes things get mythologized. Sometimes things get exaggerated, blown out of proportion, something like that. But then there's the history too. So when Stephen starts talking here, he is tying things to the legitimacy and the authority of well-respected figures like Abraham, and he is also showing some of the opposition along the way. And as we covered last week, he's identifying the people who are there in front of him as the opposition to the good guy today, to the just one today. The just one shows up. You guys are the betrayers and murderers of the just one. Okay? So I want to show you, I kind of want to get you into my mind. And the reason I want to get you into my mind, it's my channel. I can get you into my mind, right? Stephen is talking about a shared narrative, and there's a couple things that go along with the shared narrative. And you can think about that today. There's a personal identifier. You might think of a Jew during that time. They might personally identify with Abraham and Moses and David. And they did. We'd be Abraham's children. We follow Moses, not this imposter, that kind of stuff. And a shared narrative can form a society or a niche of a society. Like the United States has a shared narrative, but there might be a particular narrative of like the Mormons or something within the society that has its own little niche. Now, a shared narrative, it can be historical or fictional. The only thing that makes a shared narrative valuable is that it's shared, okay? Like standardization increases fluency. What do you mean by that? Let me show you an example here. I got this cable right in front of me. Here's a cable right here. This is a USB-C cable, okay? Standardization increases fluency, which means I can take this cable, it's USB-C on both ends, and I can plug it into any kind of device that follows the USB-C standard. So it increases fluency. So this cable can go interact with a whole bunch of different devices, okay? And language is like that. Language is a standardization. Let's all use the same labels for the same things. And if you all agree upon the same, semantic phonemes, labels for the same thing, then the language becomes valuable. And the more people that share that, the more valuable it is. Now, the sounds themselves really don't mean anything. The only reason they mean something is because we agree that they mean something. So language, in a way, is a shared fiction, okay? And the language itself, those are just indexical markers that point at real things. So you're trying to find out what that real thing is. And so a niche or a society can have anything as that which binds it together. And it could be a real thing or it could be a fictional thing. And to a degree, it doesn't matter. To a degree, it doesn't matter. And what I mean by that is when you're interacting with people, especially in our society today, there's a lot of things we don't do for ourselves. We rely on other people to do these things. And the fact that we agree on the way to interact with each other and on like currency and things like that and how to interact, that means that we can interact with people and get things from them and provide things to them and survive better. Okay, we can use each other to survive. And the fact that we share things is what makes that possible. Now, if you're a Mormon, for example, there are certain things in their mythopoetic narrative that the rest of us think are fictional. But within the Mormon niche, that is a type of currency, if you will. It has value to it. It has value proposition to sharing that mythopoetic narrative. Okay. Now, I haven't actually put this online yet, but it might be online by the time you see this. But this past Wednesday night, we taught one of our attendees on there talked about moral currency, and then we kind of extrapolated that into different kinds of currency, like power currency, hierarchy currency, prestige currency, and you could extrapolate that out into just about anything you want to. And a shared narrative has value in that it provides interactive possibilities for those who subscribe to it. And that is real, okay? That's very real. I can really go buy a car if the person at the car dealership thinks my money has value. And the money that I have, it really doesn't have value. It used to be cash, which really doesn't have any value, but now it's just numbers and computers. That's really all money is. And the only thing that gives it value is that we both agree that it has value. And if we share that fiction, then I can go get a car with that fiction. You see? So it's real in a sense. In real reality, those numbers don't have any value, but if we agree that they have value, they do. All right? So whether or not it's a real shared narrative or a fictional one is inconsequential to whether or not it can be functional and what you might call niche real or societal real or real within a group. And so when some people say your truth is not my truth, sometimes it kind of bleeds over into things like this. There can be things that are true enough for the niche to function. If you catch me, okay? They might not be empirically true. They might not correspond with genuine reality at the most base level, but they're true enough because they're shared by enough people that there's the possibility for fluency of goods and services and information because of what is shared. Are you following me? Okay. Now, with Israel, the shared narrative is the identity of the people. And if you want to convey anything very important, you have to appeal to that. And because the shared narrative, in a sense, is sacred. And that which is sacred is that which orients you. Okay, it kind of tells you the direction to go in. And so Stephen is appealing to that which is sacred, our shared narrative here, because it should orient us toward the Messiah. That which is sacred orients us. That which is profane is disruptive to that which is sacred. All right? And that's why you want to shun profane and vain babblings. Don't think of necessarily profanity there, even though profanity is probably not a good idea. But understand that profane is that which disrupts the sacred. In other words, it disrupts your orientation. And so when you engage in things that are profane, you no longer have that orienting factor in your life. And you become disoriented. And you don't know which way you're going. And if sin is missing the mark, when you're disoriented, you are going to miss the mark. And that which is sacred is designed to orient you toward hitting the mark. And that's why. So it'd be interesting if we desacralize the sacred, or if we de-religiousize the sacred and think of it in terms of that which practically orients you toward that which is most valuable. Okay? Now my mind is going on all kinds of things about sacred and supernatural, and I don't want to get there right now, but there's some interesting things there. Now, your shared fiction may be an overlay. For example, if you look at the dramatic fiction of Hinduism, they see the universe as a drama, as a big drama. But that is, they don't think empirically. I don't know of any Hindus who empirically think that is really how things are, but they kind of understand that the stories and the gods and so forth they're really placeholders for something that is numinous but that is not understood, and that is how we represent them. Something like that. So there can be a shared narrative that everyone knows is false, but it's functional to a degree within the niche. Okay. The narrative. Now, a narrative is important. Now, notice Stephen, when he's preaching, I hope you've read Acts chapter 7, he's not telling people a bunch of doctrines that they're supposed to believe. You need to believe this, 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 and this. You need to believe in the Trinity and baptism and salvation is by grace through faith, and you need to believe in the gap theory. He's not talking about any of that kind of stuff. He is telling a story. He's walking through the narrative. Now, when we cover the 4 types of knowing, do I have the 4 types of knowing in this slide deck? I don't know. I should probably put it in this slide deck. But when we cover the 4 types of knowing, starting with the deepest kind is participatory, and then perspectival, then procedural, and then propositional statements, semantic statements. That is the most shallow kind of knowing because for a lot of reasons, but because propositional knowledge, statements, labels, semantic labels for things, and sentences, it's all very low resolution. It's like data compression with a high loss of fidelity. Okay, so if you could have data compression with a high fidelity, which retains the high fidelity, maybe one of the only ways you could do that is through narrative, because in a narrative, in a story, you can keep extracting out truths forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. I've heard probably maybe 300, without exaggerating, sermons on Adam and Eve. And then I've heard psychologists talk about Adam and Eve in the story of the garden and that sort of stuff. And I've probably heard something insightful that's different, that's unique in almost all of those presentations. Okay. In other words, you can keep finding new observations and patterns within the narrative that are insightful, that can help guide and orient you as that which is sacred, with that which should orient you. So it's like a never-ending resource of information, of helpful information. Okay. So a narrative, one of the good things about narrative is that it could be a lossless form of data compression. And so there's a lot you can say in a narrative that you could not just say if you were just trying to list facts. Or you might say maybe it's not lossless data compression, but maybe it's data compression with maximized fidelity or minimized fidelity lost. Okay. And then Stephen, a shared narrative has some authority and some legitimacy to it. If we all agree on what our narrative is and what our basis, our formation, our shared story is, then you can appeal to it for authority and for legitimacy. Hey, this is in alignment with this is what George Washington would do. This is what the writers of the Constitution would do, if you could say something like that. And when Stephen's version of that is, this is what Moses said, and Jesus is right in alignment, he directly corresponds to this major prophecy that Moses made right here. Okay. And so your shared narrative is sacred and it is orienting because it is sacred, because you agree to hold it sacred. Now, we can have shared fictions too, and they could either be literally believed or just agreed upon for the sake of their functionality. And we already talked about currency. And currency, money, doesn't really have any value. Gold doesn't really have any value. I mean, I guess it does because it can cause things to function in electronics. But really, I mean, the way we use gold for jewelry doesn't have any real practical value, but it has a societal value and it has a prestige value and a status symbol value, things like that aren't very practical. So the shared fiction actually can have genuine value. You can trade a lot of money for gold, even though both of those things are arguably worthless in some sense. And then there's mimetic desire. Now, you've heard me say mimetic. Now, I'm talking about mimetic, like mimicking desire, mimetic desire, like mimic. And that phrase probably goes back to Rene Girard, is probably where I got it from. And that idea is when you see somebody else who wants something, then you tend to want it too. And I just watched a TV show where there's a girl who is with a certain guy, not because she likes him, but because it will make the other guys want her. That's mimetic desire. And if the guy that you really respect has a certain kind of car, you might want that too. All right. But it's really a shared fiction. There's really no intrinsic value in wanting or desiring the same thing. The only reason you desire it is because you saw somebody else has it, and then the way the society works, so all that kind of thing. So what I want you to do, why am I talking about all this? Because I want you to understand. I want you to understand what role this kind of thing, what kind of role the shared narrative plays, and how important it is to appeal to that when you're now I say that it's important, but this did get him killed, okay? But for the sake of everything that can be appealed to, you had to appeal to the shared narrative. Now, when Paul is notice all the preaching so far is all to Jews, because they're not preaching to Gentiles yet. It's Jews and Jewish proselytes, okay? They're not preaching to Gentiles yet, Acts 11:19. But notice when Paul is preaching to the Athenians, like all the way up through Acts chapter 7, remember Paul isn't saved yet, but all the way up through Acts chapter 7, Peter, Stephen, over and over again, they keep appealing to the Old Testament. They keep verifying Jesus of Nazareth is the Messiah because of the Old Testament. But as soon as Paul gets out there, he taps in, he's talking to Athenians. They do not share the shared narrative of the Old Testament. That's not their identity. That's not the sacred thing that orients them. So he has to find what is the sacred thing that orients these people, and how do I appeal to that? Okay? So there's a sense-making and delivery component there. Now, what else did I have in my mind? Now, what we're going to do when we look through the text is I see Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And this is kind of how my mind is seeing as Stephen is talking through the Old Testament history here. You have Abraham, he's told to leave his kindred, and then there's this land that God tells him about. And then we have Isaac and Jacob, and they're kind of skimmed over here. They don't get a lot of playtime on this radio station. And then we have the 12 patriarchs, and then it goes right to Joseph pretty much. And he is an innocent victim who was oppressed. He is a type of Christ who was also an innocent victim that's oppressed. That's important. Another thing Rene Girard very interestingly points out is that the scapegoat phenomenon was rather popular in ancient times. And the idea was that you'd have people warring against each other, and then somebody takes the blame, and then when the person who takes the blame dies, the war stops, then you have peace. Well, then that person is deified as the Prince of Peace because their death brought peace, okay? And then they would do cannibalistic rituals, and they would eat that guy's body because then the peace that he brought would be shared by everybody, that kind of thing. So Jesus is kind of appealing to that sort of thing. Now, that something Rene Girard points out that's very interesting to me is that all those scapegoat phenomenons that occurred in all these other societies, the guy who died to bring peace actually was guilty. And in the Bible, we have scapegoats who are innocent, and that's one of the major differences that we get in Scripture. And Jesus shows up, and he's the Prince of Peace to bring peace, but he's innocent. And that's the thing that just rattles you to the core when you think about that. And I probably think about that at least 10 times a day, because it's amazing to think about for me. And I'm not trying to virtue signal when I say that. It's just so different from how I was taught about, substitutionary vicarious atonement and all this all this stuff. People just make this stuff up, but a different perspective. I just find it very fresh, very, very interesting. You have young children mentioned in 7:19 who are victimized and oppressed. Then Moses shows up, and Moses, we're going to get to this, he shows up and he kind of tries to show that he can be a deliverer by killing one of the Egyptians, and that does not work out so well. And I have this phrase here, the fool is precursor to the Savior, and we'll get to that when we get to that passage. And then we have the messianic prophecy from Moses is referenced in 7:37, that Deuteronomy 18 one, and Stephen is tying Jesus to the legitimacy and authority of Moses by referring to that in the context of talking about Jesus. And then we have dissenters who want to go build a golden calf, and they don't want to have anything to do with Moses. And there's an interesting thing here. And I might start with this since we're going to go through here. Where do I have that? Let me move this a little bit, at least from my perspective. Now we're going to go to the text and we're going to look at that. We're going to look at 6:13. Notice this. They set false witnesses up against Stephen, saying, "This man ceaseth not to speak blasphemous words against this holy place and the law." So they're all, and then he talks about the customs which Moses delivered us. So Stephen is about to legitimize what he's saying based all the way back to God, Abraham, and Moses. And he's going to talk about the temple. And he's going to talk about Moses. Now notice what he says. This is very interesting to me. This holy place. See that in 13? This holy place. They're upset that he's speaking blasphemous words against the holy place. Well, when we get to 741, notice this. He says, he's talking about the golden calf. And he says, "And they made a calf in those days and offered sacrifice unto the idol, and rejoiced in what? In the works of their own hands." Now it's interesting that he says that, and then right after that, he talks about a tabernacle of Moloch. He talks about the tabernacle that came in with Joshua somewhere near here. I thought that was in verse 43 or so, but it's somewhere else. And then in verse 48, he says, there's 45, Joshua. This Jesus here in 45, that is not Jesus of Nazareth. That is the Greek spelling. Let me get rid of that. That's distracting. That is the Greek. Yesu was the same. The Hebrew word Joshua, Yeshua, shows up in Greek as Yesu. It's the same name for Jesus. So this Jesus here is not Jesus of Nazareth. That is Joshua in the Old Testament. We would call that Joshua. All right. And now when he talks about Solomon built him a house, howbeit the Most High dwelleth not in temples made with hands, as saith the prophet, heaven is my throne, earth is my footstool. What's he doing here? Look what he got accused of in verse 13. He speaks blasphemous words against this holy place. So he goes through all this legitimacy stuff. They're standing there near the holy place or in the holy place with the council. And he says, he talks about the golden calf and they're rejoicing in things made with their hands. And then he uses that same phrase, God doesn't live in temples made with hands. He ties, he's showing that God is so far above things made with hands that to venerate the temple that the council is in is kind of like the people who rejected Moses and venerated the things they made with their hands. That's interesting to me. And I'd be honest with you, that never stood out to me till just recently. It just recently stood out to me. And that's kind of fun. So we're going to point some things out that I think are interesting. Set the stage to let you know where my mind is with this. Where am I? Verse 1. Chapter 7, verse 1. And they're accusing Stephen and all that sat, I'm in verse 6:15, and all that sat in the council, we would call that, some people call that the Sanhedrin. They're looking steadfastly on him, and they saw his face as it had been the face of an angel. Then said the high priest, "Are these things so?" Now, Stephen doesn't just answer yes or no. He says, "Men and brethren, fathers, hearken. The God of glory appeared unto our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelt at Haran." And in the Old Testament, that'd be Haran. Okay, Haran, probably a guttural, hard sound there. And that appearing unto Abraham might be his face as the face of an angel, might be tied to that too. But anyway, maybe not. And he said unto him, the reason that would be salient for him to mention that, I guess is what I'm saying. And they said unto him, and said unto him, Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred, and come into the land which I shall show thee. Now, psychologically, this is a big deal. There comes a point in time when you have to stop hanging out at mom and dad's house, and you have to get out. You have to go find your own adventure, okay? You have to go make your own way. You have to go cultivate your own order. You have to face the chaos yourself and cultivate your own order from the chaos of the world that's around you. And you have to do that. You have to do that independently. And you have to gain some kind of prowess or expertise in doing that. You have to transform into somebody who can do that better as you keep doing it. And then when the society that you grew up in, or the family or the heritage or tradition that you grew up in is crumbling, and there are things about it that are senescent that need to be fixed, you are not powerful enough to fix those things until you have gone out and forged your own way and transformed into somebody who can face the chaos yourself. So a teenager, we get on to teenagers for, they all rebel against their parents. There's something in a teenager that rightfully knows that some of the order of the previous generation is so much order that it is somewhat chaotic. It is a new type of chaos. And then rejection of that blind faith and obedience to that supreme order. Like if you have too much order, what are you in? You're in a prison or a concentration camp, okay? So when teenagers rebel, there is a recognition that some of the order is out of control, if you will. Some of the order of the other generation is out of control. But as a teenager, you don't have any skill or knowledge or attunement with the arena or procedural, knowledge or prowess or perspectival awareness in order to do anything proper about it. All you know is that something's not right about it, something has to be done, and you start doing something before you're able to do much about it. And then hopefully you stop being rebellious, because you just nothing sacred is orienting you when you're just rebellious, okay? And eventually, hopefully you try to start find your way, and you build and transform into something that can come back and help restore the traditions of the Father remake them into something better. You got to be, and I don't want to sound like, when I start using words like order and chaos, I know some of y'all are out there flipping out thinking that I'm turning into some kind of Eastern New Age guy, and that's not where I'm going to. Order and chaos show up right there in Genesis 1. And there's something about reality that there's entropy. If things tend toward disorder, and in nature, everything in nature is trying to kill you, right? So there's disorder, and it is up to you to go out into the world and make enough order so that society can occur, so that living well can occur, so that you can live beyond your hypothalamic urges, okay? And your hypothalamic urges are your fight, flight, eat, mate, sleep, okay, those kinds of things are your hypothalamic urges. And every animal does that. And the thing that makes us human is that we can carve out a niche for ourselves to where we can take care of those and get those kind of on autopilot so that we can kind of do the things that make us human. We can use our prefrontal cortex to build and synthesize things. And that's what we want to be doing as humans. So you have to carve a niche out of the chaotic world so that you can make enough order out of it to do that. Well, if that order, if you stay too long in that order and it becomes stagnant, it becomes the new chaos. And then now you're in a prison which is stopping you, and you have the same problem all over again. So there has to be an element of progressing through the chaos that is presented to you, and you modify the order that you've established as you go so that it doesn't become stale and stagnant and a prison of its own. So there is a movement aspect to it. Like in the book, Who Moved My Cheese? There's something about that you always got to keep moving. You can never just plant and stick and stop and stay and not move. You're not perfect, are you? Nobody is. So, well, this is the way we've done it for hundreds of years, okay? And that's what's wrong with it, okay? that those people weren't perfect. Just because they did something for hundreds of years doesn't mean they were perfect. There's got to be something that moves that so people know what that thing to do is. All right? When tragedy strikes, the good thing about tragedy, and this, say there's nothing good about tragedy. Well, the good thing about tragedy is that you know exactly what to do. You know exactly what to do. Like when a flood comes to your town, you save all the people and animals. When a fire is in your house, you get out of the house. All right? You try to avoid the fire. You know exactly what to do. When you lose your job, you know exactly what to do. Get a job. So something about tragedy is the orienting factor of tragedy is very clear. But when there's so much order is already carved out for you, it can be difficult to figure out what it is you should be doing. All right. Now, once that order is carved out, say you go out of the world, you leave your father's house like Abraham, you carve a little niche out in society. Now you have a city or something, or a town or a village or something, like you have a little order. Now when new kids are born, you basically program the operating system into them for how to function in that fitness landscape. And humans have the most pliable, as a species, not as individuals, but as a species, we have the most pliable adaptability to different fitness landscapes. So your culture is programming you with the operating system that you need in order to operate in that culture. All right. And we need to work some flexibility into that as we're doing that. And one of the things is you as a young person, just like Abraham, you need to get out of your parents' basement, move out of the house, launch. Don't be a failure to launch, and go out there and start facing the world. Start doing the thing that has to be done. Find out what that thing is that needs to be done. And then he came out, verse 4, and he came out of the land of the Chaldeans and dwelt at Haran from thence. When his father was dead, he removed him into this land wherein ye now dwell. So he's tying where these people are sitting directly back to Abraham. He's making it real, wherein ye now dwell. This land right around us, right here, people. And he gave him none inheritance in it, no, not so much as set his foot on, yet he promised that he would give it to him for a possession and to his seed after him, which when as yet he had no child. God spake on this wise. In other words, what's he doing here? You guys don't believe in the Messiah. You don't believe Jesus is Nazareth is the Messiah, but look back at Abraham. Our shared narrative is chock full of people who were promised things that were kind of hard to believe from their perspective. And so it's nothing new that you might need to stretch. There's a lot of Sadducees in the council who didn't believe in the resurrection. Jesus rose from the dead. Doesn't go with their paradigm. Okay? So yeah, you may find some things tough to believe, but hey, that's nothing new. All of our patriarchs had some things to deal with that were tough to believe when they were told by God, and this is no different. And God spake on this wise, that his seed should sojourn in a strange land, that they should bring them into bondage and entreat them evil 400 years. Now that goes back to Egypt. Now I could be tracing cross references through all this, and I'm not doing that. I'm avoiding that on purpose, to try to stay in this narrative, in the flow of this narrative. But we will do that a little bit, maybe. There's a couple places. And the nation to whom they shall be in bondage will I judge, said God. And after that they shall come forth and serve me in this place. And we know that Egypt got hit with the plagues, and then they came out, and they eventually wound up in the promised land after a hiccup on the first go. And he gave them the covenant of the circumcision. So Abraham begat Isaac and circumcised him on the 8th day. So there's the covenant of circumcision. And Isaac begat Jacob, and Jacob begat the 12 patriarchs. So Isaac and Jacob don't get a whole lot of play here, but there's the 12 patriarchs, and look what the 12 patriarchs, automatically they do something wrong. And the patriarchs moved with envy and sold Joseph into Egypt, but God was with him. Now what's he saying there? What he's saying, in a sense, without saying it, is that Jesus is the good guy in this story, and you guys are like the 12 patriarchs doing something against him. but God is with Jesus, okay? And in other words, Jesus is the good guy, like Joseph was. Who's who in this story? Joseph is Jesus. The patriarchs are the council here, okay? But God was with him and delivered him out of all his afflictions, like Jesus rose from the dead, and gave him favor and wisdom in the sight of Pharaoh and king of Egypt. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he made him governor in Egypt and all his house. Now there came a dearth over all the land of Egypt and Canaan. And by the way, that's kind of like a death and resurrection. Joseph becomes a nobody, and then all of a sudden he winds up becoming the number 2 guy over all of Egypt. He's like ascends to power. That's kind of a picture of Jesus being crucified and then coming back for the millennial reign where he's in charge of everything. All right. Now there came a dearth over all the land of Egypt and Canaan, and great affliction, and our fathers found no sustenance. So the patriarchs are back there in Israel, and they're starving to death. But when Jacob heard that there was a corn in Egypt, he sent our fathers first, and the second time Joseph was made known to his brethren, and Joseph's kindred was made known unto Pharaoh. Now there's also a parallel here, is that on the first Advent, the first time the patriarchs get to experience Joseph after he is the boss of Egypt now, they don't recognize him. But the second time, he's made known to his brethren. And that's a picture. I think it's a picture. I can't prove it, but if you follow the patterns in Scripture, to me, the pattern seems to be there, that is a picture, a pattern, a fractal pattern, if you will, a type of the first time Jesus shows up, the Jews, he came into his own and his own received him not. And when they come back the second time, Revelation chapter 12, Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 35, he's going to have a controversy and plead with his people in the wilderness, and they are going to know who he is that time. They're going to know Jesus of Nazareth is the Messiah. And Joseph's kindred was made known unto Pharaoh. Then sent Joseph and by the way, you don't want to take these analogies like this and then try to backwards work them back into the original narrative and make doctrines out of that kind of stuff, okay? Be loose and gracious with these kinds of things. Don't try to force things. If you notice a pattern, great. If you don't, not a big deal. And then sent Joseph and called his father Jacob to him and all his kindred, 70 souls. Now there's a little thing there. If you were to that sum is not given, 70 souls. They're counted in the Old Testament. And where are these places? In Genesis 46:26, Genesis 38:12, and 46:10 and 12. Back in 2009, I was going through the book of Acts and I actually made a chart which showed all the people that are accounted for. And sure enough, Stephen is right, but they are counted in a different way in the Old Testament. All the names are there. So if you count all the names, you get 75 souls. But in the Old Testament, if the numbers that are given, it gives you like 66 one time and it gives you 70 one time. I don't remember exactly, but there seems to be a discrepancy, but there's a thing where they're not counting some of the wives, but you're told that. So anyway, the thing that's funny about this is that Adamantius Origen, who is the real generator of the Septuagint, by the way. I know the narrative. Those of you who are gone to seminary and Bible school, you were taught that the Septuagint was generated by 70 Jewish scholars about 270 BC. Well, that's a bunch of hogwash. It just isn't true. The earliest surviving manuscripts of the readings of the Greek Old Testament that are distinctive of the Septuagint do not date earlier than the lifetime of Adamantius Origen. And one of the things that he did, people say, oh, look, the New Testament writing, basically what he did here is he saw the number 70 in the Old Testament, saw 75 here, and he went back and he wrote 5 more names into the Old Testament in the Greek version, in the Septuagint version. So he his math was off, and he didn't, like what Stephen says matches what you find in the Old Testament. And Oregon, however you pronounce it, messed it up by trying to correct it. Well, he did that a lot in the Old Testament. He would take, when people would paraphrase things in the New Testament, he would go rewrite what they were referring to in the Old Testament to match the New Testament paraphrase of it. And so later on, after 1881 or so, after Westcott and Hort time frame, the narrative became that the New Testament speakers were quoting from the Septuagint, but that's not actually how it happened. The Septuagint did not exist yet. In Romans chapter 2, verse 14, it says, "For when the Gentiles, which what? Have not the law." There was no Septuagint. And Hebrew was a fluent thing in the book of Acts. We're going through the book of Acts. And then I just did a video on the conversion of Saul, why it doesn't support Calvinism, why it refutes Calvinism and disproves it. And Jesus spoke the Hebrew tongue to Paul. He says that, I think, in Acts 26. And then Paul speaks to the council in Hebrew. Okay, so it wasn't a dead religious language. They actually could speak it extemporaneously and understand it extemporaneously. Okay, but it's just funny how this narrative, the official narrative, is that the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, happened around 270 AD, and Jesus and the apostles are using that as their Old Testament. But that's not how it historically happened, okay? So I'm not going to get any further into that because we have by far diverted from where I want our focus to be today, and all I did for most of you is just make you mad, okay? Because you're attached to your narrative. You're emotionally attached to your paradigm, and your polyvagal system is putting you in defensive mode, and you're upset with me now because I exposed the narrative with which you've identified yourself. So verse 15, "So Jacob went down into Egypt and died, he and our fathers, and were carried over into Shechem, and laid in a sepulchre that Abraham bought for a sum of money, and the sons of Emor, the father of Shechem." Now, it's interesting to me, the details he does include when he doesn't say anything about Isaac and Jacob hardly, and then he gives you some of these details, okay? "But when the time of the promise drew nigh, which God had sworn to Abraham, the people grew and multiplied in Egypt." In other words, that 400-year mark's coming up. "Till another king arose, which knew not Joseph. The same dealt subtly with our kindred, and evil entreated our fathers, so that they cast out their young children to the end that they might not live." So who's the bad guy there, and who's the good guy? And it's a reminder kind of what happened when the time Jesus was born. In other words, he's saying, you guys, like what Herod did is kind of like what they did, trying to kill Jesus as a baby by killing all the babies. "In which time Moses was born, and it was exceeding fair, and nourished up in his father's house 3 months. And when he was weaned, and he was cast out. And when he was cast out, Pharaoh's daughter took him up and nourished him for her own son. And then Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was mighty in words and deeds." So he was, people say that Moses had a stutter, okay? Well, he was mighty in words and deeds. So maybe that wasn't his problem. "And when he was a full 40 years old, it came to his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Israel." Now, when the Bible says the word visit, it's not just like show up and have some tea and chat. That's how we use the word visit. It's not how the Bible uses the word visit. The word visit in the Bible is often to show up and do something for them, to usually some kind of deliverance or something. When God visited mankind, he shows up and does something for them, okay? "And seeing one of them suffer wrong, he defended him and avenged him that was oppressed, and smote the Egyptian." Now look at the explanation you get here, and you get some additional information here in the New Testament that isn't revealed the exact same way in the Old Testament. It says, "For he supposed his brethren would have understood how that God by his hand would deliver them, but they understood not." So with people during that time, and I'm telling you cultural things. Yes, this is not in the text, but there is a way of speaking through code, okay? For example, Chuck Missler points out that when Boaz gave Naomi, well, he sent Ruth back with 6 bushels of meal, that was code speak. 6 days the Lord worked, and then he rested on the 7th day. When he sent back 6 bushels of barley or whatever he sent back, that was a code to Naomi, who was a Jew, who would pick it up, that what that meant was, I will not rest until this task is complete. That's what, little code things like that. And people do things with sign. Like if you read the story of Micaiah, some of the prophets built these big old horns and stuff, like object lessons, these illustrations, physical illustrations for what it is they're trying to say. And Ezekiel laying up on the side of the wall for 390 days, that kind of stuff. Physical object lessons and illustrations of what it is they're trying to say that conveys the meaning. And so this is probably something like that, where it says that. He says he supposed that his brethren would have understood how that God by his hand would deliver them. But they did not get the message. They did not understand that. And the next day he showed himself to them as they strove, and would have set them at one again, saying, Sirs, ye are brethren, why do you wrong one to another? So he's set them at one to let's rally the troops, let's get everybody together again. But he that did his neighbor wrong thrust him away, saying, Who made thee a ruler and a judge over us? Wilt thou kill me as thou didst the Egyptian yesterday? And then Moses fled. Now what do we know about Moses? Now over here on my slide, I have this phrase next to Moses, that the fool is the precursor to the Savior. All right? And that's kind of what Moses is doing here. Moses' life is kind of divided up into 3 segments of 40 years each. And that's a long time. All right? Moses comes out. He already sees himself as a deliverer, when I use the word Savior, like the fool is the precursor to the Savior, I don't mean like the Savior Jesus Christ, but any deliverer, okay? So he already kind of sees himself as a deliverer, but God by his hand would deliver them. So Moses already had an inkling of this, all right? But when he goes out and tries to start doing it the first time, he does it wrong, okay? So yeah, he winds up being the deliverer, but when he tries it the first time, he messes up and he's not, all right? So that, I think Carl Jung says that, okay? And I know some of y'all get upset when I refer to these people, but whatever. But that's kind of important. It's very ingenious, really. Anything in your life that you're going to try to do, you're probably not going to do it well the first time. And you might be afraid to start trying, like, hey, what? I don't want to do that. I'm going to look like an idiot. Okay, well, look like an idiot. Do it. Do it poorly one time. Do it poorly. And then you engage with the world. You engage with the world around you. And the world is full of information. And when you engage with that information, it informs you and it transforms you. You become informed. You become transformed. And you transform into the person who is competent, who can do, who can come back and be the deliverer. But you at least have to start somewhere. I know when I started this channel, those videos make me want to throw up. They're just the most horrible things I've ever seen in my life. Sometimes I feel that way about videos that I just did a week ago too. And then different things happen. Like people make suggestions. People make suggestions about the audio and different software. And maybe you could start, one guy told me when I was pastor of the New Orleans Bible Church, one guy said, this YouTube channel thing you got going on, maybe you ought to give people a way to donate to that so you can build it up. I'm like, well, I never thought of that. So one thing led to another. And then I started letting people support the channel. And then pretty soon we're able to buy better cameras, better sound equipment, better computers, better software, and things start getting better. So the quality now is so much better than where it started. The first teleprompter I ever had was cut out of an iPad box with a window, and I had some Velcro stuff taped to the side to hold it up with a little iPad laying in there with the iPad, with the teleprompter app, and I'm reading it through. It's actually the video that compares Calvinism with political liberalism. That is the first video I did on a teleprompter, and it was a homemade teleprompter cut out of a cardboard box, okay? I just got off the phone with a guy today who was calling me. He's trying to start a YouTube channel, and he's asking about like audio. He's like, I don't have a big budget. What do I do? And you know, so we talked about that. And I'm not trying to talk about YouTube channels right now, but I'm trying to give you my experience. But the point is, start horribly and do it wrong. And then do the next one a little better, and do the next one a little better. But you got to start somewhere, okay? And then you gain something like Moses did here. He started and it didn't go so well. So like you start doing something, the first couple times you do something, you're the fool. You just look like you don't know what you're doing. And the reason for that is because you don't know what you're doing, but you just can't start getting that participatory attunement and that procedural knowledge and that perspectival grip on what's going on until you start to do it, okay? That participatory knowing is the deepest kind of knowing, and you have to just do it and let that kind of knowing branch out into the other kinds of knowings to where you can start doing the thing you want to do better. So the fool is precursor to the Savior, or another way to say that would be the person without skill is precursor to the expert. Okay, but you got to start somewhere. So I encourage you to do that, whether it's with Abraham getting out of the house and starting with that, or Moses getting out, whatever it is, there's something that you need to do, and you have to start somewhere and do it, okay? And then and Moses flees out and goes into the land of Midian. Now, the things that I want to say next will take a few minutes. And I am it looks like I'm a little past the 57-minute mark by the timer that I have going over here. And I don't want to go past an hour. So what we're going to do, I think that fool's precursor to the Savior is a good thought to end on with Moses. The next time we come together, now Wednesday nights, we still come together and we do our Zoom session. So everybody who donates to the channel, I have your email address. They get an invite to participate in the Zoom session on Wednesday night. So we're going to have a Zoom session on Wednesday night, and we're going to discuss either this session or whatever session you want, or whatever content on the channel you want. Whatever you bring up, we'll discuss. But Wednesday nights are for you guys to make your comments and have you and ask your questions, either of each other or me, or however you want to do it. That's Wednesday nights belongs to y'all. And so we're going to pick back up next week with this. I want to wrap it up again and say thanks to everybody who's supporting the channel. We are trying to go full time with this, so we appreciate you doing that. The details to contribute, if you want to, are in the description below. Thanks for that. And we're going to wrap this up here. Thanks for watching. May the Lord bless you, and good day.